Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Gonna hit you guys with a quick, funny, nostalgic list over here, which should be a good time. Before we get into that, I do want to mention that I am going on a West Coast tour in May. VIP and general admission tickets are down there in the description. If you do the VIP package, there's a meet and greet, and you get an exclusive piece of content, day of show. So there is that. But again, just the general admission ticket is just the regular show itself. As you obviously see that as well if you get the VIP ticket, which kicks ass. So it's going to be a fun time. I'm going to be there. Cal's going to be there. It's going to be like a TED Talk on steroids and acid, and just chock full of silliness and some memes. It's going to be great. All right, this list. I'm gonna regale you guys with some tales of my music listening past, because back in the day, I enjoyed a lot of different stuff. But in high school, being as frustrated and as angsty as I was, I liked some nu metal. I was quite the nu metal connoisseur, and I feel like doing this past Classics Week, it did get me sort of nostalgic, especially that System of a Down review, for a lot of the bands that I used to listen to back in the day. Some of which now I'm like, why did I ever like this band? Jesus Christ. This list is going to be going back on 5 records from that point in my life that are just terrible, and I really do feel like are kind of like at the bottom of the barrel in a way. Now, listen, back in the day, I was not just some kind of nu metal hype beast. I wasn't just enjoying any and every band that came across my plate. I was pretty discerning, okay? I did not like Stain. I did not like Godsmack. There are a lot of different nu metal and alt metal bands that were popular at the time that I did not enjoy. Okay, didn't enjoy them. However, so, some less than great records did slip through the cracks. And we will be going over those at least 5 of those albums that I can remember, because I used to listen to a lot of different bands, and like many people, we had big CD booklets, and I don't even remember every single CD I ever had or owned in that collection. But these are 5 that I know I had. A few of which I actually had to remind myself that I owned, sort of scouring the internet for some of the least favorable bands in this genre. I was like, oh yeah, I had that CD. So this was like digging through my own mind and giving myself flashbacks to a time in my life that I had probably erased out of my mind due to trauma. So here's the first record that we're going to be talking about here. This is Disturbed's The Sickness, which the more I look at this album cover, the more I'm grossed out by it. I have no idea how I held any interest with this record back in the day. I mean, look, there are some bands in this genre and some bands in this style that over the years I think have aged pretty well, or at least, I could look back on them and say, you know what, for the time, that was a pretty unique sound. Even though I'm not a huge fan of like the first couple of Korn records these days, I can still look back on that and say, you know what, that was like a pretty unique sound for the time. No other band sounded quite like that. I mean, some of the early groups were definitely ripping off Primus and some of the slap bass and wild, sharp, sour guitars and the pummeling drums and everything. But still, for the time, it was a pretty unique sound. Can't hate on it because it does have originality points to it, I guess. But this Disturbed record, and really every Disturbed record past this point, I just cannot stand. The band has such generic, bland, forgettable guitar tones. The songs just have no interesting twists or turns to them. In my opinion, is one of the least interesting nu metal vocalists that I've ever heard. He's absolutely goofy. There's nothing freaky or scary or like really all that visceral about his voice a lot of the time. I don't really care for his really shrill screams as well as his like overly dramatic lower range in his singing voice. And my dreams in my sea of loathing. Like I just cannot stand it these days. And some of the tracks on this record, looking back on them, even songs that I thought at the time were totally badass, like I'm dropping plates on your ass, bitch. And oh god, the title track to this thing, if I remember, I have brought up in previous videos, The title track on this thing has what I like to call a domestic abuse solo, where David essentially turns into a one-man show, where he's just kind of like screaming against the guitar riffs, and it's almost like the guitar riffs are his mother beating him, and he's like, "No, mommy, I won't do it again." Like, obviously, domestic abuse is a really horrible thing, but I feel like that's probably one of the worst depictions of it, one of the worst and tackiest depictions of it in a piece of modern art across all mediums. Uh, yeah, this is absolutely terrible. I just I just cannot go back to this record and sort of like really see what I saw in it at all. I mean, listen, back in the day when I did enjoy this LP, I didn't really, have it in like my top tiers or anything like that. I did not enjoy it as much as I did Korn and Slipknot and even Rage Against the Machine and even Limp Bizkit, honestly, who still looking back on Limp Bizkit, I could see why they appealed in the way that they did. I feel like you have to kind of have your blinders on and not really know a lot about the genres of music that they were ripping off in their music to really get into them. But still, like with that lack of knowledge, I could see why Limp Bizkit would appeal so widely. However, Disturbed, anything and everything that made them stick out against every other nu metal contemporary that they had, in my opinion, works against them, whether that be the songwriting style or the vocal style. I just really cannot go back and enjoy this album in any way, shape, or form. Despite my ability to do that with lots of other records from back in the day, Linkin Park, Hybrid Theory, and you guys know I've kind of gone through some of my nu metal picks from the past before. Next one, this debut Coal Chamber album. Coal Chamber was this West Coast nu metal band that wrote the most basic ass songs. And I mean, I guess aesthetically, if all you really wanted to hear was just the growly vocals and the down-tuned slappy bass and the really ominous horror movie guitars, and if that's all you really like cared about hearing, you didn't really care about the quality of the songs or the lyrics or really anything. I mean, you'd probably think this record is great. And there's still maybe like a couple tracks on here that are relatively catchy, like the song "Big Truck." But really everything about Cold Chamber, like now that I'm older and I can kind of see the band in the grander scheme of things, I'm just flabbergasted as to how they caught on in the way that they did. Because there's just really nothing interesting or original about their sound at all. I mean, there are elements that they just blatantly ripped off from Korn, elements that they blatantly ripped off from other bands. And what's funny is that they're not even a nu metal band that came late to the party. Like, they came early enough to the point where they should have been kind of ahead of the curve on a lot of this shit and had their own defined sound that set them apart from every other group, but really they didn't. There wasn't anything about their production or their performance style or just, again, anything that sounded significantly better or different than a lot of other groups in their field. And not only that, but I just feel like the writing is so terribly rudimentary that it's almost like offensive at this point. I mean, Korn, you could at least give it to them that, hey, like the drum parts can be pretty cool. The bass parts, the slap parts are pretty technical. You have to give it to the band for playing so proficiently on their tracks, but that is not the case for Coal Chamber at all. Like, it's horrifyingly basic, offensively basic, to the point where they're almost just doing a disservice to the nu metal genre. And now that I look at it more, I just do not get the angle of this album cover. This is only something that could have been done like in the nu metal late 90s, the groove metal late 90s, like a crazy zombie ice cream truck driver, and he's like a creepy guy, and the music video that features this character is even weirder and makes less sense. I'm gonna move on to the next one. This next one comes from a Texas group by the name of the Union Underground, who I believe, I cannot remember. This is one of those groups that I kind of erased from my memory back in the day. But I believe this band kind of caught on because they had a hot radio single that I heard. It was the track, South Texas Death Ride, you motherfucker. And this is one of many records from back in the day that sounded painfully generic, and you only got like one, maybe two freaking good songs on the album, and then the rest of it was just, please, just let me die. But yeah, I'll try to at least give the band a bit of a description here. This is one of a handful of groups at the time in nu metal that they definitely had a groove metal and a Pantera influence going on a little bit. You could tell they were trying to infuse some elements of rock and roll and southern rock into what they were doing a little bit in some of the guitar embellishments and phrasing. And it definitely came out, pretty boldly on some tracks. However, the Union Underground is far from like the first band to try any of this. So they really kind of came late to the party on everything, because there's really nothing like stunning or memorable about this record in any way, shape, or form. If you've heard any nu metal music, like this just pretty much sounds like a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And really the only thing going for it are the two biggest singles off of the record, whose hooks are pretty catchy. But outside of that, this album really has nothing going for it whatsoever, and it's just like a wasteland of just a lack of ideas, a lack of refreshing ideas. But I guess I highlight this record to sort of illustrate just how painfully cookie cutter a lot of this stuff got, because it just would not stop. Moving on from there, this dope album, which I had to remind myself that I owned and I enjoyed. This record, the title of this album was Felons and Revolutionaries. This band was a nu metal group on the more industrial side of things, and I believe they got big, if I can remember correctly. I believe they got big because they did like an industrial metal cover of like that 80s pop rock song, You Spin Me Right Round, Baby, right round like a record, baby. And this record is trying to be so freaking edgy, and obviously if you look at the title and you look at the cover, they're like edgy, but like, oh, we're saying political stuff, but they weren't really saying anything political or like of any kind of social substance. It was just kind of like this vague feeling of like, oh, we're anarchists, or we don't like the government. There's really nothing behind it outside of being like, fuck everything, man. Fuck society, bro. Fuck society. It was really kind of more like that. The vocals on this thing absolutely suck. Like the worst rap metal industrial fusion shit I've heard. Maybe not hands down, point blank period, but some of the worst I've heard. The songs are so freaking edgy and annoying. There's even a cover on this thing, which obviously in retrospect is very cringy, of the NWA song Fuck the Police. And what's funny is like, that song is obviously so specific to the experience of a black man in America being profiled by law enforcement, but they don't really change the lyrics, even though I believe the band was just a bunch of white guys. I've looked at them. They seem like they're a bunch of white guys. Like, clearly the context and the story of the song, whether or not it applied to them to perform it, didn't really dawn on them. They were just like, yeah, this seems like a cool song to do because fuck the police, bro. Fuck those police. So, yeah, it's just a really like dumb, tone-deaf, faux revolutionary industrial metal record that just sucks. And I believe there are even some parts on here where the dude just sounds like a ripoff Marilyn Manson. I mean, not all the time, but he just sounds like a dollar store Marilyn Manson. Believe me, it is awful. So if you avoid any of the records in this list, make it this one, please. Make it this one. I think we're going to move on to the last one over here. Drowning Pool, Sinner. Drowning Pool, Sinner. Drowning Pool, if you remember, was one of the nu metal groups out there who really hit it huge with one single track and just really couldn't muster up another song that measured up to it in any way, shape, or form. Other groups that come to mind that were kind of in a similar situation, Papa Roach is another example. But I would argue, like Drowning Pool, they're kind of like the Harvey Danger of nu metal music. Harvey Danger, if you remember, had that really popular rock song, Flagpole Sitta. Paranoid, paranoid, everybody coming to get me. Civilization to met me. Yeah, and the song that I'm talking about is the track Bodies. A track that's so omnipresent, I think even kids these days and people who aren't even metalheads like know the track. And it's an ingenious song. You know, like it's such a mosh anthem. The start of the track is so chilling and really captures my ear to this day. The track has sort of been replayed over and over and over and over to the point where, like, I feel like the track itself is kind of like a nu metal classic at this point. You know, if I could pull out a handful of tracks, like maybe a top 20 tracks of nu metal, of the most memorable, of the most culturally relevant, of the catchiest and most hard-hitting and infectious nu metal songs of all time, Drowning Pool's Bodies would easily make the cut. The problem is, though, is that, again, this is an example of another album that just like, you have the one fantastic song off of it and then nothing else is all that great. That's kind of what's been plaguing Drowning Pool for the entirety of their career. Now, again, Bodies is such an amazing track that, you know, it's like the fucking We Will Rock You of nu metal. You know, it's like as soon as people start hearing "Let the bodies hit the floor," they get mosh ready. But you know, everything else in the catalog is just like blah, blah. And you know, not only because I feel like in a lot of other respects, Drowning Pool didn't really stand out from other new and alternative metal bands at the time, but I just feel like their ability to write dynamic tracks across their discography, it wasn't really there. They didn't have the variety of sounds and styles and instrumental proficiency of a Slipknot or a System of a Down or a Korn, and neither were the band all that great at writing mellower songs too, which is sort of how a lot of bands from this era sort of allow themselves to write more varied records. Oh, we're going to write a slow jam, we're going to write an anthem, we're going to write a ballad, but that wasn't really Drowning Pool's thing either. So unfortunately, the one-dimensional qualities of the band, I think, is kind of hurt their long game in terms of just like progressing and writing better records and again, even making this album sound interesting from front to back. I'm just going to leave it at that. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, nu metal music, alternative metal music, industrial metal music, forever.